If you get a letter from Social Security saying you were overpaid, here's what they don't put in bold letters at the top. They can now take half your monthly check automatically, starting in as little as 90 days, unless you know exactly what to do first. If that sounds alarming, it should, because this rule changed dramatically in the last year, and most seniors have no idea it happened. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how this works and exactly how to protect yourself. And if this kind of information matters to you, subscribe, because I track these changes closely so you don't get blindsided. Let's talk about what an overpayment even is, because a lot of people assume it only happens if you did something wrong. That's not true. An overpayment happens whenever Social Security sends you more money than you were technically entitled to, and it can happen for reasons that have nothing to do with you making a mistake. Maybe they recalculated your benefit years later, based on updated wage records. Maybe your living situation changed and it affected your payment amount. Maybe there was simply an error on their end. A miscalculation buried in some system nobody caught in time. Whatever the reason, if Social Security decides you were overpaid, even years after the fact, even through no fault of your own, they consider that money a debt you owe them, and now they can come after it aggressively. Here's where the real story is, and this is the part that's caused so much confusion and fear over the past year and a half. Back in March of 2024, under pressure from advocates who pointed out how devastating it was for seniors to lose their entire monthly check to overpayment recovery, Social Security capped the default withholding rate at 10%. That meant if you owed money, they'd take 10% of your monthly benefit until the debt was paid off. Manageable for most people, painful, but survivable. Then in March of 2025, that changed completely. Social Security reversed course and jumped the default withholding rate all the way up to 100%. Your entire check. Gone. Every month until the debt was paid in full. You can imagine the outcry that caused, and rightfully so, because losing 100% of your Social Security income overnight isn't a hardship. It's a crisis for anyone living paycheck to paycheck, which describes the vast majority of seniors relying on these benefits. The backlash was immediate and loud enough that just weeks later, in late April of 2025, Social Security walked it back again, this time settling on a 50% default withholding rate for what are called Title II benefits, which includes retirement, survivors, and disability insurance. And here's the critical detail you need to understand. This 50% rate is where things stand right now, as of this year, and it applies to any overpayment notice dated April 25th, 2025 or later. So if you get a notice today, this is the rate that applies to you, not the old 10% and not the brief 100% either. I want you to really sit with what 50% means in practical terms. If your monthly benefit is $1,800 and you receive an overpayment notice, Social Security can automatically start withholding $900 from your check every single month until that debt is repaid. And this can begin automatically if you don't take action within 90 days of the notice. $900. That's rent. That's groceries. That's a medication refill. Cut in half without warning, simply because the government decided, sometimes years after the fact, that they'd paid you too much. Now there is one piece of good news buried in all of this. If you receive SSI, Supplemental Security Income, rather than Social Security retirement or disability benefits, this 50% rate does not apply to you. SSI overpayments remain capped at 10% withholding, which for someone receiving the full monthly federal SSI amount works out to roughly $99 a month. Still a burden, but nowhere near as devastating as losing half your entire income overnight. So here's the part I really want you to focus on, because this is where you actually have power in this situation. You are not required to simply accept a 50% withholding rate and watch your check get cut in half. There are specific forms you can file and specific deadlines you need to hit that can pause collection entirely while your case gets reviewed. The two most important forms here are the SSA 561, which is a request for reconsideration, essentially telling Social Security you believe the overpayment determination itself was wrong, and the SSA 632, which is a request for waiver, telling them that even if the overpayment happened, it wasn't your fault and repaying it would cause you financial hardship. Here's the critical detail that makes all the difference. If you file either of these forms within 30 days of receiving your overpayment notice, it can freeze collection entirely while Social Security reviews your case. That means no withholding, no cut to your check while everything gets sorted out. But that window matters enormously. If you let that 30-day period slip by without filing anything, and then let 90 days pass entirely, the 50% withholding can begin automatically, whether you've disputed it or not. There's also something called a simplified waiver process that applies if your overpayment is $2,000 or less and you weren't at fault for the mistake. In cases like that, Social Security can waive the debt entirely through a streamlined process that requires far less paperwork. And in many cases, you can even initiate it over the phone rather than navigating complicated forms on your own. I want to walk you through a real example because I think it makes this whole thing click in a way that just explaining the rules doesn't. Well, imagine a woman, let's call her Marjorie, 72 years old, been on Social Security retirement since 65, receiving $1,860 a month. She gets a letter one day saying Social Security recalculated her benefit based on wage records from her final year of work and determined her monthly benefit should have actually been $80 less than what she'd been receiving. Multiply that $80 difference across 40 months, add interest, and suddenly she's staring at a letter saying she owes nearly $9,000. If Marjorie does nothing, that 50% withholding kicks in automatically after 90 days, meaning she loses $930 from her check every month until that debt is repaid. But because she called her local field office within days of getting the notice and filed both the SSA 632 and SSA 561 within that critical 30-day window, her collection got frozen while her case was reviewed. That's the entire difference between losing half her income for potentially years and buying herself time to actually fight the determination or negotiate a repayment amount that doesn't destroy her monthly budget. So here's exactly what you need to do if you ever open your mailbox and find one of these notices. First, don't panic, but also don't ignore it because the clock starts ticking the moment you open that envelope. Second, call Social Security immediately or visit your local field office and ask specifically about filing the SSA 561 if you believe the overpayment calculation itself is wrong, or the SSA 632 if you believe you shouldn't have to repay it due to financial hardship or lack of fault on your part. Third, make sure you file within that 30-day window because that's what actually pauses collection while your case gets a real review instead of letting the automatic 50% withholding start without your input. And if you're currently financially struggling and the overpayment amount is $2,000 or less, ask specifically about the simplified waiver process because that could resolve the entire situation with far less hassle than you might expect. Here's the bigger truth I want to leave you with. This policy has swung wildly over the past 2 years, from 10% to 100%, back down to 50%, and honestly, nobody can promise you it won't shift again. Government policy in this area has proven it can change with very little warning. That's exactly why staying informed matters so much right now. Not just for what the rules are today, but so you're not caught completely off guard if they shift again down the road. You worked your whole life to earn these benefits, and an unexpected letter claiming you owe thousands of dollars back is genuinely frightening, especially when you did nothing wrong to cause it. But you do have real tools to protect yourself here. Real deadlines that matter, real forms that can pause the bleeding while your case gets a fair look. Knowing that difference, understanding that timeline, that's what stands between losing half your check for months or years and actually protecting the income you depend on. If this helped you understand a rule that could genuinely affect your finances, subscribe to this channel because I'm going to keep bringing you the truth about policies like this the moment they change, not months after the fact. And if you know someone who might be at risk, someone who's had a recent change in income, work status, or living situation that could trigger a recalculation, share this with them now before they ever open that letter, not after. A few minutes of preparation today could save them from losing half their check tomorrow.